You need to hear this, because the file ranger Emmett Timmons closed on this one was never actually finished. This is the story of three friends who vanished on the Appalachian Trail, deep in the Appalachian Mountains, and how, 3 weeks later, only one of them was found, alive, with her mouth sewn shut. In the second week of May, three friends, fit, capable, but green to real backcountry hiking, set out for what should have been an easy 2-night loop through the Roan Highlands on the Tennessee-North Carolina line. They never checked back in. 3 weeks later, a park ranger doing routine trail cleanup found one of them, alive, silent, stitched shut. What follows is her account and his. Timmons had cleared this stretch of the highlands for 6 seasons. He knew the blowdown patterns better than the trail maps did, which is the only reason he clocked it at all. A deadfall pile off the main path, a quarter-mile out, that hadn't fallen the way deadfall falls. It had been moved. Bear activity, maybe. Something denning under it. He almost logged it that way and kept walking, chainsaw still idling in his hand. And that right there is the version of this story where he never finds her. But the wind shifted, and he caught wood smoke. Thin. Wrong. Coming from a direction with no permitted sight anywhere on the map he carried folded in his back pocket. He cut the saw. Followed the smoke through hemlock so thick he had to turn his shoulders sideways to get through it. And that's when the trees opened up onto a cabin that had no business existing. Gray, weathered, the wood gone soft and silver the way wood only goes after decades of weather, not one season. Nothing about it was on any Forest Service record he'd ever filed or read. The door was already open. She was sitting against the far wall, alive, alone. Her eyes found him the second his boot crossed the threshold, and she didn't scream, didn't move toward him, didn't do any of the things a rescued person is supposed to do. Her mouth was stitched shut. Coarse, dark fiber threaded through her lips in a pattern no ER doctor would recognize. And the skin around it had already started healing into the thread, which meant days, not hours. Whoever did this had time to spare and no rush at all. She kept her eyes on the door behind him. Not on him. On the door, like she was counting down to something she expected to walk through it. It took a week before her jaw healed enough to hold a pen. Timmons sat with a legal pad in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and cut flowers somebody's relative had dropped off, reading each line back to her to make sure he had it right. From here on, it's her account. In her words, exactly the way she gave them to him. The first wrong thing wasn't scary yet. That's what made it easy to ignore. Reese had the paper map out again, unfolding it against her knee every 10 minutes because none of them had thought to download an offline one before they lost signal. Des had packed a full face of makeup for a 2-night loop and hadn't stopped complaining about her pack straps since the trailhead. Harlow was the one who'd picked a fight with the guy at the outfitter over trekking pole rental fees an hour before they even started walking. So when the first thing went wrong, everybody already knew exactly who was going to be the one to say something. The trail narrowed, where it cut through a stand of rhododendron, branches close enough on both sides to brush their shoulders, and that's where the man came through, going the opposite direction. He clipped Harlow hard enough to spin her half around, split the line of the group clean in two. 6'10", easy. Traditional hunting gear, a blaze orange hat pulled low, and gauze wrapped across his face like a burn victim, just his eyes showing through the wrap. A pillowcase hung off one shoulder, dark and heavy at the bottom, dragging his whole frame sideways with every step he took. Nobody caught the smell coming off it until he was already past them. Harlow wasn't letting it go. "Watch where you're, asshole!" He didn't turn around, didn't slow down, didn't react to her at all, like the words hadn't reached him, or like they had and just didn't matter. He didn't turn around at anything the whole rest of that day. That detail gets explained later. It isn't a good explanation. They shook it off. Distance covered, 5 miles, give or take, and the light had gone long and gold through the trees, the kind of light that tricks people who don't know better into thinking they have more daylight left than they do. That's when they saw smoke, off through the trees, away from the trail. None of them knew enough to be suspicious of that. Smoke meant a camp, and a camp meant maybe a shelter, maybe people. So they left the marked path and cut toward it, branches snapping under their boots louder than they meant them to. And there he was again. Same orange hat, same wrapped face. The pillowcase sat on the ground next to him now instead of over his shoulder, and he was hunched over something on a log, a knife working in his hand, carving at whatever it was. Deer, maybe. Moose. None of them knew enough about hunting to tell the difference, and the distance kept them from getting close enough to try. Wait, Des said it out loud because somebody had to. Didn't he go the other way? He had. They'd watched him walk it, headed the opposite direction, and there was no trail cutting back through here, no shortcut, no version of the map that put a man on foot 5 miles ahead of 3 people who hadn't stopped moving the entire time. Nobody answered her. Nobody had the chance to, because that was the exact moment he set the knife down, stood up, and lifted the thing off the log like it weighed nothing. 200 pounds of wet muscle held up in one hand the way you'd hold a toddler on your hip. He brought his face down to it. One long breath in through the gauze, deliberate, like he was confirming something he already suspected. Then his tongue came out, and he licked it, once, twice, satisfied the way a man gets satisfied when a guess pays off. He tossed it aside after that, tossed 200 pounds like it was nothing at all, and walked back into the tree line without looking at them once. Nobody brought up the impossible math again. Not because they'd forgotten it, because 30 seconds later, Harlow was already talking about teaching him a lesson, and that turned out to be a much easier thing to argue about than the thing none of them could explain. Harlow wasn't done being angry, and this time nobody stopped her in time. She peeled off from the group the second the tent came into view, planted just off the trail where he'd left it, and announced exactly what she planned to do about a man who'd shoved her off the trail and never once looked back to check. "You are not doing that." Reese had a hand out like she could physically hold her back from 10 feet away. Harlow was already unzipping the flap. "Watch me." Des laughed, the kind of laugh that comes out before a person decides if something's actually funny, and then Harlow was inside and the tent was moving with her weight, and neither of them could see what she was doing in there, which was somehow worse than watching. Nobody ever found out if that was the reckless move, or the one that bought them a few extra hours they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. While Harlow was still inside, Reese crouched over the pack he'd left leaning against a tree root, meaning to dig out the travel wipes Harlow had asked for through the tent wall. The zipper caught twice before it gave. Her hand went in past a coil of paracord, past something wrapped in a plastic grocery bag that she moved without thinking about it, and closed around a second bundle, looser, softer. She didn't understand what she was looking at for a full 3 seconds. Then she did. Ears, small, curled, some still with the piercings in them. Fingers, several, dried dark at the knuckle. A scattering of things that might have been trinkets once. A watch face with no band, a hair tie still wound tight around something she made herself stop looking at directly. She counted 3 before she made herself stop counting. "We have to go." Her voice came out flat, the kind of flat that happens when a person's not letting themselves feel the thing yet. We have to go right now. Harlow came out of the tent still grinning, still victorious, and the grin didn't survive contact with Reese's face. Des reached the pack next, looked down into it herself, and the sound she made wasn't a word. What the fuck are these? Nobody answered her either. They ran. They found the trail again by dead reckoning more than by the map, and the real shelter came up out of the dark faster than any of them expected. 3 sides and a roof and one man already inside it, alone, a small fire going against the growing cold. He didn't ask what was wrong before he was already talking them down. Foster Yancey, he told them, like his name might steady them, and it did a little, just from the ordinariness of it. Calm down. He kept his voice low even, the voice of someone who'd talked people through worse. Tell me what you saw. They told him, all of it. The shove, the impossible 5 miles, the pack. He didn't flinch at any of it the way they expected him to, and that should have told them something, though none of them clocked it at the time. We go together, he said once they'd run out of words. First light, strength in numbers. We stick close till then. First light became the only thing that mattered after that. Every minute left before it got measured against it, weighed against it, survived because of it. Near midnight, Harlow's stomach turned on her again, worse this time, and she was already moving toward the tree line behind the shelter before anyone could stop her. I'll walk you, Foster said, standing before she'd even asked. They were gone longer than 10 minutes should have taken, and somewhere in that stretch of dark, the fire behind Reese and Des started making a sound it hadn't been making a few minutes before. It came out of the tree line carrying Foster in one hand and Harlow in the other, and it carried them the way a person carries grocery bags, thoughtless, low, swinging faintly with each step. Reese saw it first. The fire threw enough light to reach maybe 15 feet past the shelter's open side, and for a second that was the only mercy in the whole night, because for a second she couldn't see past the edge of it. Then it walked into the light, and the mercy ran out. It stood taller than the man from the trail had stood, which shouldn't have been possible, because the man from the trail was the same 6'10" frame, same blaze orange hat pushed low. But something about the proportions had shifted since that morning. The shoulders sat wrong on the frame, too wide for the waist beneath them, like something built the body out of parts that were never meant to stack that way. Its hands hung well past where knees should have been, and Foster's whole body, 6 feet of grown man, fit into the curl of one fist with room left over. The gauze had come loose somewhere in the walk from the trees, hanging in a torn strip off one shoulder instead of covering what it used to cover, and there was no hiding the rest of it now. The nose wasn't a nose so much as a ridge, narrow and hooked, curving down sharp at the tip, like something meant for tearing instead of breathing. The nostrils flared wide and dark every time it pulled in air, wide enough that Reese could see straight into the black of them from 10 feet off. Its eyes sat too deep in the skull to catch the firelight the way eyes should, but there was a shine back there anyway, low and yellow, like something reflecting off wet glass at the bottom of a well. They didn't blink. They tracked. It stopped at the fire's edge and dropped both bodies at once, no more ceremony than a man setting down a bag of feed. Foster didn't move once he landed. Harlow's chest was still rising and falling, shallow, fast, but she didn't stir either. It stood there a moment, head tilting a few degrees at a time, deciding something about the two of them still on their feet. Reese and Des threw everything they had. Water bottles first, then a headlamp, then the cook pot still half full of cold coffee that Foster had made hours ago, and none of them had wanted to drink. Every single thing bounced off it or past it, and it kept walking, unhurried, like weather moving in on its own schedule. Des went down first, not from anything it did. Her boot caught a root in the dark and she hit the ground hard enough to knock the air out of her. It reached her before she got a hand back under herself, closed around the collar of her jacket, and lifted. For 1 second, held a foot off the ground with her legs still pedaling at nothing, she just looked surprised. The specific kind of surprised a person gets tripping on a stair they've walked 100 times before. The brain not yet caught up to what the body already knows. Its other hand found her scalp, fingers spread wide enough to cover her whole skull, and it turned her head with no more effort than turning a doorknob. The sound that came with it wasn't loud. It didn't need to be loud. It brought her close after that, close enough that Reese, backed against the shelter wall with nowhere left to go, could see the mouth working open beneath that hooked ridge of a nose. It wasn't shaped like a mouth so much as a long seam splitting wider than a jaw should allow. Lips peeling back thin and gray over rows of teeth set too close together, too many of them for the space, each one narrowed to a point that had never needed a knife's help to get that sharp. It brought that ruined nose down against Des's scalp and pulled in one long breath, slow, savoring, the nostrils working like bellows. Satisfied, it let her drop, the sound of her hitting the ground somewhere behind it as it turned toward the shelter wall, toward Reese. She ran without deciding to. Roots caught at her boots, branches raked her arms open in the dark, and somewhere behind her, once, she heard her own name in a voice that wasn't Foster's and wasn't Harlow's, and then nothing at all. The ground disappeared out from under her, a drop she never saw coming. And when she stopped falling, the silence was so complete she could hear her own blood moving. Nobody ever explained how it had gotten 5 miles ahead of them on foot that first afternoon. This didn't explain it either. It just left the fact sitting there, that whatever this thing was, walking had never really been how it got where it needed to go. The last thing Reese remembered was a hand reaching for her face, not her throat. Months after they carried Reese out of those woods, Timmons was back on the same stretch of the Highlands doing the same routine sweep he'd been doing for 6 seasons running. That's how he found the second pile. Deadfall off trail, moved instead of fallen, same as the first one, the one that had led him to the cabin and to her. This time he didn't log it as bear activity. This time he didn't touch it at all. He radioed his position, marked the coordinates, and walked back the way he'd come, and that was the last anybody heard about it in any file he was willing to write down. Reese healed in the ways a body can heal. The wires came off her jaw 6 weeks after Timmons found her, and the stitches underneath had already knitted so far into the skin that the surgeon pulling them free kept stopping to ask her questions she couldn't answer. What kind of thread was this? Who had access to suture-grade material that wasn't suture-grade at all? Why was the tissue responding like the wound was days old instead of hours old the first time anyone examined it? Nobody in that hospital ever got an answer that satisfied them. Nobody outside it did either. She talked eventually, gave Timmons the account he wrote down on that legal pad, page after page, reading each line back to confirm he had it right. He never once asked her to explain the parts that didn't make sense, because by then he'd stopped expecting parts of this story to make sense. He closed the file on a Tuesday, the same kind of ordinary Tuesday the whole thing had started on, months back, before any of this had a shape. "The thing I keep coming back to," he said out loud, to no one in particular, the same way a man talks to a room after he's been alone with a problem too long, "isn't what took Foster or Harlow or Des. It's that whatever did this had every reason in the world to make sure Reese couldn't scream, and every reason not to kill her anyway. He sat with that a while before he wrote the closing line. "I've got a theory. I'd rather hear yours." The last item logged before he shut the folder wasn't part of anyone's official inventory. It was a boot. Child-sized, decades of wear worked into the leather, sole nearly gone through at the heel. Found 40 yards from the cabin, half buried under leaf rot that had been building over it for years, not weeks. It didn't match anyone on the missing list. Not from this case, not from the ones before it. Not from anything Timmons could pull up going back as far as the records went. He bagged it anyway, logged the coordinates, set it aside in the same drawer where he kept the rest of what never made it into an official report. The things that didn't have a home anywhere else. The things that just sat there collecting dust and questions nobody upstairs wanted asked out loud. He didn't write down what he thought it meant. Some things, he'd learned, are better left in a drawer than in a file anyone else might read.